Welcome to today's story. The Quiet Savior. A Western cowboy saves an Apache girl on the streets of Arizona. A tale of courage, compassion, and destiny in the Wild West. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tell us, where are you watching from? Let's get started. The Arizona sun sank low on the horizon, spilling molten gold across the endless red plains. The air shimmered with heat, the scent of dust and gunpowder lingering faintly in the wind. The small town of Tombstone lay quiet beneath the fading light, its wooden buildings creaking as if sighing from the long day. A lonely horse's hooves echoed through the street, slow, measured, unhurried. The rider, a tall man in a faded hat and weather-beaten duster, guided his mount with the ease of someone who had spent more years in the saddle than on solid ground. His name was Eli Carter, and silence was his companion. Eli wasn't known for talking much. Folks who did know him, few as they were, said he'd seen too much to waste words. He'd fought in border wars, chased bandits across canyons, and buried more friends than he cared to count. The war had left its marks on him, not the kind that showed on skin, but the kind that lived behind his eyes. Gray as storm clouds, those eyes held the weight of someone who'd once believed in good and lost it somewhere along the trail. Tonight he wanted only a meal, a drink, and a quiet bed in a quiet town. He rode down the main street of Tombstone, passing shuttered shops and tired faces. The saloon's swinging doors beckoned with the sound of a piano and the low murmur of voices. He dismounted, tying his horse to the post, brushing the dust from his coat. As he stepped toward the saloon, a sound reached his ear, faint, muffled, coming from behind the general store. It wasn't the sound of laughter or talk. It was sharper, desperate, a cry quickly swallowed by a man's rough voice. Eli stopped mid-step, his instincts sharpening like a blade drawn from its sheath. He turned toward the alley, boots crunching on the hard ground. The light grew dimmer there, shadows crawling up the wooden walls. He saw them before they saw him, 3 men, drunk and mean, crowding around a young Apache girl who had no business being there. Her hair hung loose and tangled, her clothes torn from struggle. She pressed her back to the wall, eyes wide and terrified. The men laughed, their breath thick with whiskey, their hands rough and cruel. "Come on now, sweetheart," one of them drawled. "Ain't no need to be scared. We just want to have a little fun." Eli's expression didn't change, but something in him shifted. He'd seen scenes like this before, in border towns, mining camps, and lonely stretches of the frontier where law was just a word. Sometimes he'd turned away, convincing himself it wasn't his fight. But not tonight. His right hand drifted slowly to his holster, the motion practiced, precise. The men were too drunk to notice the quiet figure stepping closer, too sure of their cruelty to sense danger in the silence. The girl whimpered as one of them grabbed her wrist, jerking her forward. That was the sound that broke the quiet. A single gunshot tore through the night. The alley filled with smoke and the stench of burnt powder. One man dropped, howling and clutching his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. The other 2 froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding as they turned to see Eli Carter standing at the mouth of the alley, revolver steady in his hand. He didn't need to speak. His stare was enough. A look that carried the weight of a dozen graves and the promise of more if they didn't move fast. The 2 men ran, stumbling into the street, shouting curses over their shoulders. Eli holstered his gun. The girl stood frozen against the wall, trembling. The wounded man groaned on the ground, cursing through his pain. Eli ignored him, stepping closer to the girl. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice low and even. She shook her head, though tears streaked the dirt on her face. Her breathing was ragged, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Eli looked her over, saw no blood, only fear. "Run home," he said quietly, nodding toward the open street. She didn't move. Her eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, met his, filled with something deeper than fear. "I don't have one," she whispered. Her voice was soft, broken, carrying the weight of truth. Eli studied her for a long moment. He saw the marks of hunger, the bruises on her wrists, the hollow look of someone who had gone too long without safety. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17. Apache by blood, outcast by circumstance. He knew what that meant in a town like Tombstone. A girl like her wouldn't last a week alone. The frontier wasn't kind to the lost. He sighed quietly, the kind of sigh that came from a man tired of walking away from things he shouldn't. Then I guess you ride with me, he said finally, tilting his head toward his horse. The girl blinked at him, unsure whether to believe his words. Why? She asked. Eli shrugged, eyes fixed on the horizon. Because it's the right damn thing, that was all he said. He offered his hand, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, she took it. Her hand was small, cold, calloused from hard living. He helped her up onto the horse, then mounted behind, guiding the animal out of the alley and into the open road. Behind them, the man on the ground groaned again, but Eli didn't look back. The desert was waiting, and the past had no claim on him tonight. They rode in silence through the edge of town, the stars beginning to prick the sky above. The air grew cooler, the moon rising pale over the jagged silhouette of the mountains. The girl held onto the saddle horn tightly, her body tense, unsure of the man who had just saved her. After a while, Eli spoke again, his voice softer this time. What's your name? She hesitated before answering. Naya. The name carried the sound of wind through the pines. Well, Naya, he said, you're safe now. She didn't answer, but he caught the faintest nod. As they rode beyond the last flickering lamps of Tombstone, Eli couldn't help but wonder what he was doing. He'd told himself he was done helping people, done playing the hero. But when he'd looked into that alley and seen that girl, something in him had refused to stay silent. Maybe it was guilt, maybe redemption, or maybe deep down he was still the man he'd once tried to be. The desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Eli Carter didn't feel completely alone. And that, in its quiet way, was enough. The morning came cold and pale, the desert sky painted with streaks of rose and gold. Eli woke before the sun, stirring the dying embers of their campfire while Naya slept, wrapped in his spare blanket. The land stretched out endlessly before them, flat, silent, alive, only with the sound of wind brushing against the sagebrush. He poured a bit of coffee into a tin cup, its bitterness cutting through the chill. For a long time, he watched her sleep, wondering what kind of world turned a child into a survivor before she even had the chance to be one. When she finally opened her eyes, there was confusion at first, then recognition. She sat up slowly, blinking against the dawn light. Eli handed her the cup. She hesitated before taking it, both hands gripping it tightly as if it might vanish. Drink slow, he said. She nodded and did as told. The warmth returned color to her cheeks, faint but noticeable. They ate what little they had, dried meat and stale bread, before packing up camp. The horse whinnied softly as Eli tightened the saddle. The desert day was already warming, promising another long ride toward nowhere in particular. They traveled in silence for hours, the hooves of the horse stirring clouds of fine dust that trailed behind them like ghosts. Eli kept his eyes on the horizon, following instinct more than direction. The road west would take them away from Tombstone, away from questions. Naya sat straight, quiet but alert, scanning the land like someone always ready to run. After a while, she spoke, her voice barely audible over the wind. You didn't have to help me. Eli gave a low grunt. Guess not. She looked at him from the corner of her eye. Then why did you? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. Because I've seen too many people look the other way. His tone wasn't angry, just tired. Naya turned back toward the open desert. She didn't ask more. Some truths didn't need repeating. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind born of two souls who had both lost too much to waste words. They stopped by a dry creek bed at noon, letting the horse drink what little water they had. The sun burned high overhead, and heat shimmered off the stones like fire. Eli wiped sweat from his brow and looked at Naya. She sat in the shade of a boulder, tracing shapes in the sand with a stick. Her hands were small, but her movements were steady. She carried herself like someone who had already learned the world's cruelty and refused to show fear again. Where are you headed? He asked. She shrugged. Don't know. Used to live near the White Mountains. Soldiers came, burned everything. My people scattered. Her words were flat, emotionless, as if she had told the story too many times in her head already. Eli nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. She gave a small nod. "Me too." They rode again until the sun began to dip. By evening, they reached a cluster of hills where the land softened, dotted with mesquite and ironwood. Eli decided to camp near a dried-up well. As he unpacked, Naya gathered twigs and kindling without being told. She worked quietly, her movements careful but practiced. He watched her for a moment, realizing how quickly she adapted to survival, like she'd been born for hardship. When the fire caught, she sat across from him, her face glowing in the amber light. For the first time, she looked less afraid, almost peaceful. "You ever had a home?" she asked suddenly. Eli looked into the fire. The flames danced, reflecting in his gray eyes. "Once," he said softly. "A ranch near the border. My wife and boy lived there." He paused. "Then came the war. And after that, there was nothing left worth going back to." The words hung between them, heavy with loss. Naya didn't reply, but her gaze softened. She understood grief better than most grown men. After a long silence, she whispered, "I think maybe you still have something left. You just don't know it yet." Eli gave a faint, crooked smile, the first in a long while. "Maybe," he said quietly. That night, the wind picked up, whispering through the desert like an old spirit. Eli couldn't sleep. He sat with his back against a rock, watching the stars bleed across the sky. Naya slept beside the fire, breathing softly, the lines of worry smoothed from her face. He thought about all the people he hadn't saved, all the chances he'd wasted trying to outrun himself. But here, under the wide sky, beside a girl who had every reason to give up and didn't, something inside him shifted. He didn't call it redemption. He didn't even believe in that word anymore. It was simpler. Peace, maybe. By dawn, they were riding again, this time north. The land grew greener, the air cooler. Naya began to talk more. Small stories of her people, the songs her mother used to hum, the games she played as a child before the soldiers came. Eli listened, saying little, but her words stirred something long buried in him. Memory, warmth, humanity. They stopped near Prescott by midday. An old widow named Mrs. Hargrove ran a small ranch there, a place known for taking in strays, orphans, drifters, wounded souls. Eli had stayed there once years ago after a gunfight had left him half dead. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Hargrove came to the porch, her gray hair pinned neatly, her eyes sharp as ever. "Well, I'll be," she said, "if it ain't Eli Carter." He tipped his hat, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Got room for one more?" he asked. Her gaze moved to Naya, reading the whole story without a word. "Always," she said softly. Naya hesitated, looking between them. "You're not staying?" she asked. Eli shook his head. "Not today." Her brow furrowed and she stepped closer. "Where will you go?" He looked out toward the hills. "Wherever the trail leads." Mrs. Hargrove placed a gentle hand on Naya's shoulder. "You'll be safe here, child." The girl nodded, but her eyes stayed on Eli. He met her gaze and gave a small, reassuring nod. "You did good, Naya," he said quietly. "You keep doing good." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eli turned, mounted his horse, and rode away into the red dust. The sound of hooves faded into silence, swallowed by the desert wind. Naya watched until he disappeared over the ridge, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Gratitude, sorrow, hope. As twilight fell, she stood by the fence, looking out toward the vast emptiness beyond. Somewhere out there, a quiet cowboy was still riding beneath the same sky, a man who carried his ghosts but no longer let them own him. She whispered a prayer in her native tongue, not for herself but for him. For the man who had saved her life without asking for thanks, and who, in doing so, had unknowingly saved his own soul. The desert wind carried her words into the fading light, soft as a promise, strong as the land itself.